So we are excited to have our historian Thomas Shannon here from the Germantown History Department. He's doing 3 sessions with us, today being the first one. The additional 2 you can sign up for on our website currently now. They happen on February 18th and March 18th, all on a Thursday night at 6:30. So we found this to be the best time, and we have such a great turnout. So we are very excited to have everyone here. You can also just some library news. We have a new newsletter. So if you are not on our newsletter, you can go to the website and sign up for that. So that way you can be up to date on all the current activities, developments, Libby apps and books and things that are coming to the library, as well as the events that are upcoming. So please do that if you are interested in receiving additional information from us. So we're at 6:35. We're going to still let some people in. You know, this is a great subject for us. We're all excited to learn a little bit more about the history on Cheviot. And what we're also going to do is, if you have any questions towards the end or anything that comes up in the presentation that Tom is discussing, please write them in the chat and we will get to them after the presentation. Or if we feel like it's a great question at that moment, I'll propose it over to Tom as well. So please send us anything that you have. If you can't hear us or if there's anything that's going on, just send us a chat so that way we can connect with you and make sure we're up and running perfect. So Tom, welcome. We're excited to have you. Take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Katrina.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
everyone for coming out. It's such a great turnout. Very pleased to see how many people signed up and came out for this presentation. If you just bear with me a second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. This presentation is based on a project that I did with the Parks Commission last summer and into the autumn. They had a kiosk project. They wanted to put up a bunch of signs at each park, a little bit about the ecology and general information about each park. And they asked me to write a short history for each park, the first one being Cheviot. I wrote a short history for them. I thought it was short. And it turned out into a much bigger project than I anticipated, and probably a bigger project than anyone on the Parks Commission anticipated. The kiosk itself is done and complete. I'm going to continue working on writing a longer, probably book-length history, including Cheviot and including some of the other hamlets in town, such as Viewmont. And so I'll start here. If you go down to Cheviot Park today, you'll look out and you'll see an island. At low tide, you might see a couple of islands. This one here, this was the end of the steamboat dock. This is looking back towards Cheviot Park from the furthest out island. There was a building here, and this was completed in 1911. And I use this picture as illustration because I want to show just how much different this looks. This was taken in 2019. The next picture I'm going to show you was taken probably sometime around 1911, 1915. And that's the warehouse that was at the end of the dock. And that's a small steamboat there. I believe this may be Edgar DeWitt, a grandfather of the Edgar DeWitt that many of us knew, passed away in 2015. This is just an illustration of how much different a place can look in just 100 years, or possibly less. So I just want to jump back a little further into time and begin with the history of Cheviot. We don't have a whole lot of documented Native American history for this particular part of Germantown. There is substantially more documented archaeological evidence of Native American hunting camps and fishing camps up closer to the Rojan. This area that's now Cheviot likely was used as a seasonal fishing and hunting camp by Native Americans. Around the time of the Palatine Migration, 1710, this area was initially called Hunterstown. That's after after Governor Robert Hunter, who was the colonial governor of New York at the time, spearheaded the Palatine Naval Stores project. Let me show you the map here. Hunterstown is down here in the southern part of town. Hunterstown was the initial name for the Palatine camp around where Cheviot is now. You can see the three other Palatine camps: Haysbury around Lower Main Street, Old Queensbury, which is around Sharp's Landing Road, and Ansbury, which is the approximate location of North Germantown. So Hunterstown, each camp here had several hundred Palatine Germans here from 1710 to 1712 when the project dissolved. Hunterstown here had among them the three of the grandparents of Nicholas Herkimer, a famous general from the Revolutionary War. He was the hero of Oriskany battle in the Mohawk Valley. The next name that came to be associated with Cheviot here was that of Jacoby, the last name Jacoby. Heinrich Jacoby came to own Cheviot sometime in the late 1700s. We have Cadwallader Colden's map of Germantown. Some of you are familiar with it. Has each property numbered, and we have a key that tells us who owned each property in 1740, but unfortunately there are many numbers that we just haven't found the original deed for, so we don't know who owned it in 1740. But at some point in the mid or late 1700s, a man by the name of Heinrich Jacoby, who was the grandson of an original Palatine settler named Ulrich Jacoby. Ulrich was a settler in Ansbury. At some point, his grandson Heinrich came to own the landing here in Cheviot. And that became the name of the hamlet for a time in the late 1700s and into the early 1800s, Jacoby's Landing. The other thing of note that's going on by the mid 1700s is there's a grist mill established on the creek here in Cheviot. Now, it appears that Judge Robert Livingston financed the construction of this dam and grist mill on the creek here. The mill itself was operated likely by a man named Philip Klum, K-L-U-M, another Palatine name, and later his son Adam Klum. There you can see a little bit there, the name Heinrich Jacoby and the grist mill on the creek here in Cheviot. The other thing of note before I get going more on the grist mill is the ferry. From the earliest times, there was a ferry from here, which was the primary landing. If you look here, this is the 1850 reprinting of the 1798 Wigram map. Cheviot was the most prominent river landing in Germantown at this time, the late 1700s. And this ferry went over to the Palatine camps on the west side of the Hudson River, in the area of what's Saugerties and West Camp now. So this grist mill is operated by a couple of generations of Clums, and as many of you know, the Cheviot Cemetery was largely restored this year, 2020. A couple of stones were broken and stacked up against a tree, and we have them over at the parsonage now. One of them, I had some trouble interpreting exactly what this stone says here. I can see it looks like Christoph or Christopher, and then Fell Fritz. Now, Fritz was a pretty common Palatine name here in Germantown in the 17 and early 1800s. His death date here, as you can see, is 27 December 1762. And so I was kind of at a loss how to interpret this name. Fell Fritz, couldn't quite make out exactly what the FEL meant there. So doing a little bit of further research for this presentation, I was looking up Adam Clum, and I found a marriage record for him. And this is 1764. This is a Reformed Church record. Adam Clum here, November 19th, 1764. Adam Clum, K-L-U-M, son of Philip Clum. He got married to a lady named Katerina Fritz, and she's the daughter of Christoffel Fritz. So going back to the stone, I believe the engraver looks like it may have just ran out of stone and continued his name on to the second line, Christoffel Fritz. So that's just the sort of connections I've been making. We do have one other stone from the Cheviot Cemetery that was leaning up against a tree, and that just has a death date. It doesn't have a name or any other engravings on there. So that leads me up to probably the worst day in Germantown history. And this is, I'm skipping ahead quite a bit here in time, to 1845, March 26, 1845. And now I'm back out on the island. Disregard the old causeway. That dates to 1911. So imagine just looking back here at Cheviot Landing in 1845. There was a group of 9 people from Germantown. They took a large rowboat and they were towed up behind a steamboat to Hudson, New York. They spent the day furniture shopping up in Hudson, New York. They filled up their rowboat with all the new furniture they wanted to furnish their houses with. They get back to what's called East Camp then, and they're still towed behind a rowboat. They get to the channel, which before this causeway and steamboat dock were here, large boats could not approach the landing here at Cheviot. It had to be relatively small barges, small steamboats, and other small craft to actually get from the channel to the dock. There's a lot of sandbars, as there still are. You have to be careful getting a boat in and out of there. So they get back from furniture shopping in Hudson a little bit after dark. It's probably about 6 p.m., 7 p.m. on March 26, 1845. The rowboat is let loose to make its way towards the shore. It's also a very, very windy night. So there's a lot of wakes, a lot of whitecaps on the river. Right after this rowboat is let loose from the steamboat that towed it down from Hudson, a scow, a type of barge with a sail on it came by at full speed. It was a very windy night. It did not hit the rowboat, but it came very close to it and caused a large wake, which tossed 7 of the 9 people out of the rowboat into the freezing waters. And then just a few moments later, a steamboat came by at full speed and actually ran over the rowboat, knocking the other 2 people into the water. All 9 of the people that were in the rowboat passed away that night. Many of them were very prominent people in the town. I'll give you a list here. I've got a man named Rufus Lasher here. So he's the husband of Lucinda Rockefeller, and you'll see both of her parents. Her parents are George Rockefeller and Margaret Gretchen Rockefeller. If you're wondering what Margaret's maiden name was, that's it. It's Rockefeller. There's a bunch of prominent people here. George was a town supervisor for many terms in the 1820s, 30s, and into the 40s. We also have Andrew Hover, a prominent lawyer from Germantown. All these families are pretty interconnected as well. Emmeline Rockefeller, she's the wife of Jonas Reifenberg. He was an early school teacher at the Cheviot schoolhouse, possibly the original teacher. His house, I don't know that it's standing today, but we do have documentation, a newspaper article from probably the 1950s or 60s. His house survived at least until then. And the other thing too, so Rufus Lasher here, he passes away. If you look, his wife, Lucinda Rockefeller, upon his passing, and she lost both of her parents as well. This is Rufus Lasher, born 1 year after this Rufus Lasher. He's a third cousin of the late Rufus Lasher. He marries Lucinda Rockefeller, his third cousin's widow. This Rufus Lasher is responsible for building the first railroad station in Germantown and also the East Camp Hotel, which later became the Cheviot House Hotel. So this is a view from the East Camp Hotel. This garage here was the original train station. The train service for the Hudson River Railroad came through Germantown in October of 1851. Rufus Lasher, the surviving Rufus Lasher, was the man responsible for building the station, building the hotel, and he also was a boatman by trade. Most of the shipping from the dock was controlled by him. But he did form a cooperative barge called Harvest Home, which was a barge formed with him and some of the farmers nearby to offset shipping costs. That was established in the 1850s, even after train service had been established. So even though there's train service here starting in 1851, water travel does remain a very large part of Cheviot. Farm produce would come down this hill here. Although even at the early to mid 1800s, by that time, farmers are opting to go north to Lower Main Street or even as far as a relatively new landing, what's now Anchorage, because the approach down to the river is much gentler grade. Cheviot, even to this day, is quite the hill. And you can imagine taking a full wagon load of, say, apples down that hill. There were many accidents, runaway horses, and whatnot over the years. So if you look here, this is a picture of the station, a little closer to what it originally looked like. This picture is probably from the 1930s or possibly early 40s. One thing you'll notice here, the station's currently a good bit shorter than this building. It's the same building. I believe there was a fire here at some point. On the inside, there is evidence of some smoke damage, some water damage on the wallpaper on the lower floors here. All these windows are still in, this garage, covered with T111 siding now. And obviously that's a full-size door on the second floor. In later years, into the later 1800s and early 1900s, after train service had been ended at East Camp, this was used as tenant housing for people who worked for the Lashers and later the DeWitts. So there's passenger and freight service at Germantown, at East Camp here from 1851 until 1867. Around 1867, the executives of the Hudson River Railroad approached Rufus Lasher. They wanted to buy a piece of land from him in order to expand operations. I don't know exactly which piece of land. I would guess probably out here towards the bay more. They wanted to build a bigger station. Rufus Lasher had no interest in giving away or selling land to the railroad. Like I said, I think he was a boatman by trade, and in his heart too. I think he preferred water transport. But either way, he was not interested in giving away any of his land to the railroad. In 1868, the railroad discontinues service here at East Camp and moves their passenger rail station up to the site of that station is right about at the very end of Young America Road, where it curls towards what was the Young America Hotel, is on the river side of the tracks. This station that was built in 1868. When I do a presentation about Lower Main Street, I'll get into that station moved a couple of times over the years and burned at one point too. And this is the Cheviot Hotel. This obviously is the 1930s, I would guess, picture. This is the house Rufus Lasher built. Largely a hotel. There were, tickets were sold apparently from one of the rooms in this house at one point. There's also a post office in this building at one point. That's another thing about Cheviot is the post offices. There were in several different buildings throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. It moved around quite a bit before Postal Service moved to the center of town exclusively. And this is an example of some of the events that were held at the East Camp Hotel. There's a New Year's Eve ball. Yourself and lady are solicited to attend the New Year's Eve ball at the hotel of Rufus Lasher, East Camp. This is 1866. The thing that stuck out to me is this is kind of expensive, I thought, for 1866, $2.50 to go to a ball. The other thing of note here is you'll notice a lot of the same last names from the boat accident in 1845. Trumbore, Salpaugh, Lasher, Rockefeller. Just gives you an idea how common those names were in that era and somewhat still are. And a lot of these families were intertwined as well. This is a map from 1907, I believe. This is a map put together when Edgar Rufus DeWitt, this is a grandson of Rufus Lasher, the surviving Rufus Lasher. He ends up owning the hotel. See here, the railroad station is called the Tenant House here. There's two houses over here, both still standing. This is the stables for the hotel. In red here, these are the bounds of railroad property. These are the tracks, and this is the original shoreline. And now in 1907, E.R. DeWitt, Edgar Rufus DeWitt, he applied for a patent to build a steamboat dock out to the channel so that large vessels could unload cargo and not have to navigate with smaller boats to this dock here. Edgar R. DeWitt, he's born in the 1860s. From the time he's a young man, right around 20, right in the late 1880s, he starts to really develop the dock here. He sold coal, lots of coal, lots of cement. His primary business here, I believe, though, was the cider mill and the wine works that were the cider press was in this building here. Edgar R. DeWitt also served as a town supervisor several terms. And here we go. Here you can see this, I believe, is a cooperage. On the prior map there, it says coal. He did sell a lot of coal off this dock. Also made a lot of barrels here. But this is the primary business. I believe this is 1894, the date on this building. E.R. DeWitt's primary source of income here is cider and wine. Obviously, Germantown, those days, the primary crop was apples. So this is E.R. DeWitt's lifeblood here down on the dock. That's a picture of one of these buildings. You can see the barrels along the side. This, I believe, is Edgar R. DeWitt. Now this here, you can see here, this is the Cheviot watch box. This still exists. It's over here now. It's on the other side of where the hotel is. It's in a yard here, just on the other side of the tracks now. The other thing to note here, on the other side of the river, in what's now called Smith's Landing or Cementon, town of Saugerties, there's something like 5 ice houses. This is one of them. There's another one about here. The river channel is over here on this side, and for whatever reason, there's a great concentration of ice houses here. Here in Germantown, we had 2 in that era. This is a closer up shot of the Cheviot watch box. You can see the cooperage that I pointed out in previous pictures, and the cider mill. Now this, the watch box, I believe, was, there's only enough room for like maybe 1 or 2 people. I believe this was used for railroad employees. in place of like a proper tower, like North Germantown had. North Germantown had a 3-story tower. I think that was a little bit more common in those days, but this served in place of having a full tower. Now this picture is great. This is a view from about halfway out onto the causeway. The causeway is built in, the grand opening is August 22nd, 1911. There was a lot of, all the town dignitaries were down there. Edgar R. DeWitt received a lot of accolades, basically for opening a new market for the area's farmers. He really wanted to develop his property and also just continue helping the farmers in the area get their products to the market. This is the backside of the cider press, the cooperage. This is the Cheviot House Hotel, East Camp Hotel, Cheviot House Hotel. And this is, I mentioned before, this is a view of the stables, the Cheviot House stables. This building, I'm not really sure. It's obviously gone now. The other thing of note here too is you could get smaller vessels and barges up to the side of the causeway here. It was really the causeway out to the middle, out to the shipping channel. That was built so that ocean-going vessels could be serviced at Germantown. And this is another view, the cooperage, the cider mill, and there's the beginning of the causeway. And the other thing of note here too is one of the other things that the Cheviot House was used for, among balls. Another common use was town board meetings were held here at East Camp Hotel, later the Cheviot House Hotel. It was very common. The first recorded town board meeting was held at Simon Rockefeller's house out on Route 8. Another common place that town board meetings were held in the 1800s was the Central House Hotel on Main Street. Now this is a view of, I don't know exactly who these folks are. If anyone can identify them, please email me if you recognize anybody. This is the cider mill. This is the Cheviot House Hotel. This building's been through quite a few renovations over the years, and the porch on this house has been through so many different looks. It's hard to keep track. Every picture looks a little different. And here's a close-up from down on the causeway. This is anthracite coal, big pile of anthracite coal, and also brand new barrels from the cooperage. One thing here, if anyone can help me out identifying what this looks like a ladder up to maybe like a signal platform or an observation tower. I'm not sure exactly what that was. You'll see it in at least one other picture I've got here. Here we go. This is a good shot of what the causeway looked like. I've got these pylons every, looks like maybe 8 feet or so. Some cross beams here, all holding in a bunch of rock and dirt, keep holding it together. Obviously, you can tell even then in, let's say 1920, 1930, when this picture is taken, you can see the effect that the tide had on this. It did not last very long. There's a observation tower, signal tower, whatever this is here. And there's another shot of the causeway in whole here. Like I said, there's a warehouse out here, right at the end of the dock. And here we go. This is a little later shot, 1920s. This is from somewhere up closer to Lower Main Street, looking south towards Cheviot. You can see the buildings on the dock and the causeway going out towards the channel. Now, about a quarter of a mile north of the Cheviot dock on the river, there's an ice house operated at least by 1882, possibly earlier than that. And that was established by Philip W. Rockefeller and Christopher C. Kuhn. That would have been on this picture, the ice house, somewhere in here, somewhere on this parcel or so. Let's see. Now, this is the only picture that I have in the Germantown History Department collection, which shows the ice house here in the background. These are the Cheviot House stables. This is where the ice house was. There's a record after the railroad acquired the ice, what's called the ice dock parcel. There's mention in the document relating to that there was a fire and that it burned down around 1906. In newspaper accounts, it does say that the ice house caught fire, but it also makes clear that the fire was put out before the entire house was destroyed. So it was repaired around 1906, but it does get sold to different owners after Philip Rockefeller and Christopher Kuhn pass away. I believe it's one of the Rockefeller sons sold off all the lumber piece by piece for the ice house. Some of it at a pretty steep discount, so I assume that, some of this wood was heavily damaged by the fire. Some of the lumber was sold at like 25% its original cost, and some was sold at something like 60 or 70% of its original cost. And now, the one story that did not make the cut for the kiosk, because of how sad it was, relates to these stables here. And it's the story of Alexander DeWitt. Alexander DeWitt is an uncle of Edgar R. DeWitt, who owned the hotel and the causeway and the dock. He is quite a bit older. When he was about 40 years old, he enlisted in the 141st Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. He was part of the 3-year enlistments in August 1862. He ended up serving in that regiment, the 141 Pennsylvania, for the duration of the Civil War. His regiment was in some of the bloodiest fighting of the whole war. They were involved at the Peach Orchard the second day of Gettysburg. They were also involved in several of the major battles of the Overland Campaign in 1864, spring of 1864. And he survived. He was never wounded, obviously never killed. As an older man in the 1880s and 90s, he lived in a room at the hotel and worked for his nephew, Edgar R. DeWitt. And he was up at Lower Main Street. There's a cooperage up there as well. Just gives you an idea how big the cider and wine industry was here at Cheviot. That they not only had their own cooperage, they were buying barrels from other cooperages in town. Alexander DeWitt went up to get a load of barrels at Lower Main on September 11th, 1897. And on the way back, he told a friend, one of his coworkers, that it was the last load he was ever going to bring. And later that day, the man who lived one lot over heard cries of distress from the stables here, and he found Alexander DeWitt in severe distress on the floor in the stables here. And Alexander DeWitt had intentionally consumed arsenic. He passed away shortly thereafter. And Dr. Clum is another important figure here. He lived up at the top of the hill. His second house still survives up at the top of the hill. Dr. Clum is a well-known physician, nationally known, nationally recognized, and he came down the hill to try to help Alexander out, but he passed away very shortly thereafter. If you go to see Alexander DeWitt's gravestone, it's in the Viewmont Cemetery. It's on the south side of Cemetery Road. He's buried right next to his nephew, Edgar R. DeWitt, and his stone is almost completely eroded. You really can't read it too well anymore. I'll get to that next. So Dr. Clum, he lived up at the top of the hill. He, like I said, is a nationally recognized doctor. He wrote several books. Some of them can be found on Google Books. They're available and they're full versions. And the other thing I wanted to say was in the 1890s, there was several arsons throughout Cheviot. There was a major string of arsons in the 1890s. Dr. Clum's house, his first house, was burned down. This is the Cheviot schoolhouse. This was burned as well. I want to say this is the rebuild. This was burned down in 1895. I believe the original was built in the 1820s or 1830s. Another building that was burned down in the 1890s was Cheviot Methodist, which I have pictures of later in the slideshow. The other thing that goes on in the late 1880s, 1890s, so the landing here is known as East Camp in these days. The name Jacoby's Landing faded from use. For a while, Rufus Lasher's name attached to the area and was called Lasher's Landing. So if any of you live here in Cheviot, if you look back on your deeds, some of them will say Lasher's Landing instead of East Camp or instead of Cheviot. Now this name Cheviot, this is a shot of students at the schoolhouse here. Some of them are identified. The name Cheviot, I believe, came as just a theory here. I believe that it came from the building of Cheviot Methodist in 1891. Now, this man here, Robert E. Livingston, he lived at Northwood, and he bought up quite a few parcels of land in Cheviot in the 1870s, 1880s. He passes away in 1889, and by then he had already given the piece of land that Cheviot Methodist was built on. Cheviot Methodist is the Legion Hall today. This is the first reference, the Cheviot, first and probably only Cheviot on the Hudson reference that I see in the literature. And my theory is that the Cheviot Hills are about 30 miles away from Ancram, which is the ancestral homeland of the Livingstons in Scotland. And obviously from Cheviot here in New York, looking out towards the Catskill Mountains, they're about 30 miles away from the dock here. So I believe that is the source of the name Cheviot. Obviously, that name has stuck ever since the late 1880s, 1890s. The East Camp Hotel, this is Edgar DeWitt's hotel, that is last referred to as the East Camp Hotel in 1888. And then by 1893, it's being referred to as the Cheviot House. And this is a shot of Cheviot Methodist. This is Woods Road here. You see there's a big hump of dirt here, which is, obviously isn't there now. The other thing of note here is there's really no trees other than apple trees here. If you look at any of the old aerial shots of Cheviot, apples were king. I go back a little bit here. So these one group of students at the Cheviot Schoolhouse. This is the Cheviot Schoolhouse as well. And as you can see, 1895, this is obviously rebuilt after the fire. Cheviot Methodist also fell to an arsonist in 1897. And that was rebuilt immediately. It burned down 6 years after it was built. Obviously, it was rebuilt right away. This picture is a bit of a mystery to me. It's labeled the Cheviot Masonic Hall, and I don't know where it was, but it seems like the Masonic Hall was founded in 1855, which is about the time that Rufus Lasher is really building up his dock, building the railroad station, building the hotel. Obviously, it's gone now. If anyone knows, please let me know during the Q&A. This here, Dr. Klum, I mentioned earlier, this is his house here, still stands. This is his barn. I just mentioned the wave of arsons in Cheviot in the 1890s. There was another wave of arsons in the 1970s, and this barn burned down, I think, in 1972. There's a picture of it on the Gibson Photographs website on fire. This barn, I'm not sure who this belonged to. Obviously, it's not there anymore. But this is just a great shot of Cheviot Road and Cheviot Extension as it used to look. Cheviot Methodist. This is a little bit closer to how it looks now. Like I said, nothing but apple trees. Really no tall trees, and certainly no houses. And Woods Road here is just dirt. This is a shot a little bit later. This is probably from 1930s or so. And this is towards the end of Edgar R. DeWitt's life. He died in 1932, but his business has declined severely with the advent of Prohibition. Obviously, put his cider mill out of business. He continued to sell cement and coal off of this dock here. But obviously, the passenger rail service was long gone by this point. And, as I alluded to earlier, farmers, while they used the causeway, if they could, they would go north, either to Lower Main Street or to Anchorage to get a gentler grade down to the river. So these things contributed to Cheviot's decline, the dock's decline, especially. In the 20s, obviously the cider mill goes out of business when prohibition's passed. Like I showed you before, it's really just timbers holding the causeway together on the sides. Edgar R. DeWitt passes away in 1932. And these buildings all, not exactly sure if they were dismantled or if they burned or what happened to them. If anyone knows, please share. But the causeway, the timbers rotted away, and the tides pushed all the stone that was the heart of the causeway, just swept it aside, and now we just have a few islands that you can see at low tide. So this is Cheviot now. This was Christmas Day, the sunset on Christmas Day. So the Cheviot Schoolhouse still stands, the 1895 rebuild that's been remodeled, and it's a private house now. The East Camp Hotel, later the Cheviot House, is a private residence now as well. The train station looks like a garage, but it's the original train station that's still here with us today. The Cheviot watch box, and I showed a picture or two of, that's still here in a different location. Cheviot Methodist, rebuilt in 1897, sold to the American Legion in 1939 for $250. And obviously, that's a popular meeting place in the community still. The other, I don't have any pictures of it, but the other thing worth mentioning here, 20th century Cheviot history, is Andrew Mickle purchased a general store and a post office, operated a post office here from 1918 until the Cheviot post office closed down. Ray Roberts operated that post office for a time as well. Andrew Mickle, one of his daughters, married a man by the name Hugh McLean. And Hugh McLean, well drilling, was a very big operation here in Cheviot in the mid 20th century. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures to share of that. So, I mean, people come down here to watch the sunset. People come down and hang out at lunchtime. There's great fishing here. A lot of people come down to duck hunt still, and people come to see that view of the Catskill Escarpment. And that's how to get in contact with me or the other members of the history department. You can email us here, germantownhistory@gmail.com, or call us at 537-3600.
Thank you, Tom, so much. I had a couple responses to your presentation and one or two questions. So I'm sorry, just waiting here. We had a question as to what was stored in the warehouses, and I know you did mention that. You mentioned a couple items. If you just wanted to.
Almost. I mean, the big products were apples. Obviously, anthracite coal was coming in from the coal fields in Pennsylvania. The Delaware and Hudson Canal was open in this time, which came out at the Rondout Creek in Kingston. Edgar DeWitt would buy it wholesale from the Pennsylvania coal fields, store it on his dock temporarily, and distribute it to buyers here in Germantown. He was an agent for Olson Cement. The cement factory is directly across the river. He sold cement from the dock. Those were the big ones. I'm sure he sold a little bit of everything, though. You're on mute, Katrina.
Oh, sorry. So I had a comment about possibly the watch box is more likely a crossing shanty for railroad employees to stop road traffic when trains are approaching. Yeah,
I believe that's what it was. It was just a little shack for railroad employees.
And then I believe this was the item where you were wondering what it was. It looked like a ladder.
Yeah.
And I think this is what it's related to. Isn't that a barge with a superstructure for a pile driver?
That's possible. I mean, I'm not sure who typed that, but
Bruce.
Bruce Romanchuk.
Yes, okay. Bruce. Yeah.
I'm not really sure what that was. I can discuss with him. Unless he wants to unmute now.
We have a question from Martin. Sure. He wants to know who gave permission to build the dock.
So Edgar R. DeWitt had to apply for a patent. I assume he probably had to make an application to New York State, I guess. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I can go back and do some research.
Okay, that would be great. And then we have another one that says, have you done much research into all the arsons in Cheviot, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
I know who the old firefighters and other folks think. There's one person who passed away a few years ago who is thought to be the arsonist, the 1970s arsonist. As far as I know, nobody knows who the 1890s arsonist was, but we know who the person probably was. Not sure what his motive was, but I won't name who it was here.
Do you have any other questions or comments or feedback? We do appreciate this, and I know we had some late arrivals, but Tom is doing 2 additional talks. February 18th is the next one, and then we have March 18th as well.
February 18th, I'll be talking about the Rockefellers of Germantown, and then March 18th, I'll be talking about the lost graveyards here in Germantown. There's 2 big ones that are just completely gone, with no marker, no commemoration. Most people don't even know they're there.
So I have another question. Bruce says, great presentation. Thanks, Tom. Martin wants to know, how did they get to the ice dock to unload the ice?
So there is a crossing, ice dock crossing from Fisher Lane. At one time would run all the way to what's now Lower Main Street. Closer to Lower Main Street, there was a crossing where employees could go from that road down to the tracks, across the tracks, and access the ice dock, landing there at the ice house. They could go up the road from Cheviot as well. The only thing you have to remember is the Hudson River Railroad was a 4-track railroad. In that time, there was a track on what's now the access road where people drive up and down the tracks. There was a railroad track there. So as far as I know, the crossing was off of Disher Lane, up closer to Lower Main Street.
That's great, because that kind of leads to our next question. It says, when did the railroad track change to just 2 tracks? Or what?
I don't know the answer to that. I can only kind of go by the pictures here. I'm sure it's documented. I just don't know the answer to that.
Gotcha. A question from Carol.
Sure.
You mentioned that Dr. Clum's house was burned and then you showed a Dr. Clum's home. Was there a previous building elsewhere that was burned?
No, I believe Dr. Franklin Clum's house was on that same footprint, I believe, as the house that's there now.
Was there ice sailing in Cheviot?
Ice sailing, I'm sure there was. I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't have any pictures on file at the History Department of ice sailing, but yeah, I mean that was a common practice back when the river flows over more reliably.
Gotcha. I had somebody comment back, Mary and Dan Howard. They believe the railroad tracks went from 4 to 2 in the 1950s.
Okay.
So any words on the shad and sturgeon fishing?
Yeah, I mean that's always been a big industry. Obviously, the shad fishing is more. That was a big business for Edgar R. DeWitt or Rufus Lasher previously. And the other thing you have to remember is the dock was private land at that time. There's access was much more restricted in that era. Right now it's public land. You can come down. Anybody who wants to fish can access the dock or fish from shore anywhere up and down the river. But yeah, shad and striper fishing was always a big industry there.
Great. So we have a couple of hand raises. So at that moment when I call your name, you can ask your question directly to Tom. So that way it's a little bit more one-on-one. So Adrian Westmore, you do have your hand up. So if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. This has been wonderful. I wanted to just mention the watch box. According to Rita, who's I think 105 now, and of course lives at the top of the hill, she relates that her father used to be there, and when the train came by, they would drop the mail on a hook after the station closed, right? So that's one way it was used. And she would actually pick up the mail and take it up to the post office. It was further up the hill.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. One of the pictures I have here showed the hook. Give me just a second. I'll pull it back up. If you look here, Adrian, the mail hook is right here.
Oh, there. Okay, cool. Thank you.
The outhouse.
Right there.
And the other thing that's different about this building now, too, is there's a chimney here. On the inside here, there's a couple of chimney flues. I'm sure there was some wood stoves right in the middle here. Like I said, this is an old structure. You wouldn't really know it now, and it's changed so much. But yeah, I think this photograph, I don't know, looks like there's only 2 tracks. I can see a car here that's 30s era. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Tom? Well, we do appreciate everyone taking the time out to support Tom and the history, obviously, of Germantown. There's so much information, and I know, Tom, the parsonage, you're not currently open, or what is
The parsonage is still closed due to the COVID-19 restrictions. It's hard to socially distance in there. The rooms are kind of small.
Yeah.
I stopped by there to do research here and there, but it's not open to the public at this time.
Gotcha. Adrian, if you have another question, definitely see your hands raised.
There we go.
I just had a question about, this was really a bustling place of enormous economic and business importance to the immediate area. What was the relationship with the Livingstons themselves? Did they show up down here from time to time? Did they get on the train here, or did they have their own station, or how'd that work?
Sure. Hi, Don. Thanks for the question.
Hi.
So the Livingstons, like I said, I believe Robert the judge, financed the construction of the grist mill on the creek here in Cheviot. Like I said, Robert Edward Livingston, he's the gentleman who builds Northwood. He's born in 1810 or so. He's the founder of Northwood, builds Northwood. His later years in the 1870s and 80s, he's buying up land here. He's kind of creeping his estate closer and closer towards the money to build what became Cheviot Methodist. I really don't think that they came up to Germantown to get on the train. One good indicator is Eleanor Roosevelt's My Day columns. She grew up technically in Claremont, in the old Livingston estate on Woods Road, and she always, almost without fail, describes herself as growing up in Tivoli. So I presume they probably, to the extent that they got on the train locally at all, they probably got on at Tivoli, would be my guess. But the strongest Livingston influence any time close to modern times is Robert E. Livingston of Northwood, and his land purchases and his putting up the money to build Cheviot Methodist.
Tom, we've had many thank yous on your presentation, and they look forward to the other ones. One question from Laura Webster: have there been ghost sightings on the river or in Cheviot?
I think my wife has seen 2 so far. We've lived down here for 7-8 months now, and she's seen 2. I don't know if anyone else has any other experiences to share regarding that, but this is an old piece of land. There's been a lot of people lived through here. There's been a lot of history. There's been a lot of bad stuff's gone on. The other thing too, I didn't mention it, I don't think, about the boat accident in 1845 is that the body of, I believe it was Margaret Rockefeller, her body was never recovered after that boat accident. So, I mean, if you're, if you're of the mind to believe in ghosts, I think there's probably plenty down here.
Yeah, that may be a nice, great topic afterwards to see additionally. So you always wonder. If there's any other questions, definitely take advantage of the time. Ask Tom. Okay. Mary Shannon did send. There have been 2 odd incidents in my kitchen, but they've been good vibes, though. That's good.
Yeah, they're friendly ghosts.
Friendly ghosts, yes. And then someone else just say they grew up down there, and there are ghosts in Conway.
I'm sure there are.
A lot of thank yous. I apologize that you can't see, maybe you can see all the chats, but everyone is extremely appreciated. So well done, Tom. So we'll just ask one last time before we go. So if anybody has any additional last questions, please do so. Just you're unmuted, so you can ask directly if you like to. If not, we will end this session and see you guys next month.
One last thing, Katrina, whenever the parsonage does open up, please come visit me. We're open 9 a.m. till noon on Saturdays. And for now, just email me or give me a call. Any old stories you have to share, I'd love to hear them. Any old pictures. I see in the chat, somebody asked, where is the parsonage? The parsonage is 52 Maple Avenue in Germantown.
Yes, hopefully we'll be back there soon on Saturdays for you.
Yeah.
Be nice.
But for now, just send me emails and give me a call.
Great. Perfect. Again, a lot of thank yous, and you're seeing them. So we appreciate everybody attending. We had, I counted off the top 59 people that did show up with attendance.
Wow.
And I missed one or two, but it was great. Very good. So we look forward to it. So thank you, everybody. If you have additional questions, please reach out to Tom. And I look forward to seeing you next 2 months. Oh, trains.